Welcome to Mastering Your Financial Life, hosted by Judy Heft, the founder and CEO of Judy Heft and Associates, Financial and Lifestyle Concierge. This year, she's celebrating 27 years in business. In every episode, Judy interviews professionals who help others successfully manage their financial lives. You can find this show on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Judy is the author of 2 books, How to Be Smart, Successful, and Organized with Your Money for a Better Today and Tomorrow, and her latest book, Mastering Your Financial Life Cycles, How to Successfully Manage Money in Every Decade of Life. You can read chapters of her books and catch prior episodes of the show at www.judithheft.com. Now, here's the host of Mastering Your Financial Life, Judy Heft.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to our 58th episode of Mastering Your Financial Life. I'm Judy Heft, Financial and Lifestyle Concierge, and I'm really enjoying doing this podcast, and I am sure you will too. Today, I'm thrilled to be here with Jeffrey Verdon. Jeffrey is a partner at Falcon Rappaport Berkman, and they focus on estate planning and asset protection for affluent families and successful business owners, which is a great niche to have. He's also the author of Estate Planning for Women, and there are so many great tidbits in that. I hope you all check it out. So welcome, Jeffrey. I'm thrilled to have you here today as my guest.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Judy.
Oh, thank you. So, you have a unique approach to estate planning for the affluent clients out there and the business owners. How does that, tell us about your approach?
Absolutely. When I started practicing law out of law school, and then after getting my master's degree in taxation, I was doing traditional estate planning, living trust, wills, and so forth. And in the mid-'80s, our firm was hired by a small group of doctors in Newport Beach, California, where we practice. And these doctors wanted to retire in 5 years. The problem was they could not get malpractice insurance to last more than 5 years post-retirement. Now, these doctors delivered babies for a living. So you can imagine, once they retired, 5 years passed, their insurance went away, but they were on the hook for that child's malpractice liability until that child reached the age of 18, plus the statute of limitations before they were out of the woods legally. So that took these doctors into their early 80s before they were no longer at risk for a lawsuit. And they had accumulated some wealth, and they wanted to protect that wealth in case there was a lawsuit. And of course, California is one of the leading states for lawsuits anyway, so they were quite concerned about that. Now, in law school, in my graduate tax program, they taught us about wealth transfer, protecting the legacy and moving it to the next generation. But we never really addressed the fact of what happens if your clients get sued before they die or retire and those assets are taken. So I put together, which by today's standards was a very rudimentary a plan to protect their assets from lawsuits. But then it occurred to me, what was my more important role in representing my client, making their kids and grandkids richer by transferring all this wealth, or protecting my clients and their legacy? So I changed my approach to estate planning, Judy, and I began to have conversations with our clients about asset protection. Let's talk about what kind of exposure you might have in your life and your job and your profession. And let's build some firewall protections around those assets first, and then we'll tackle the estate planning and those other issues second. So I began to integrate estate planning with asset protection going back to the mid-'80s. And back in those days, law firms and estate planning firms were not doing this kind of work. And over the last 30 some years, we've become a leading provider of these services. And as you can imagine, some of my clients have had to use it because they've been threatened with a lawsuit or they've been sued. And when the plaintiff realizes that suing my client is not going to generate a significant recovery, they're much more willing to sit down and talk settlement so both parties can walk away from the lawsuit intact.
Really, what is asset protection? Can you explain that in a little more detail for our listeners?
Sure. Asset protection is the process of retitling assets in such a way that if the individual client or their business is sued, those assets are not going to be in jeopardy. If you, for example, were to gift an asset to your uncle, and because you felt like you wanted to make a gift. And then 2 years later, you got sued. You're absent to fraudulent conveyance. In other words, absent you doing this in advance of this lawsuit that you saw coming, they could not go to your uncle and get that gift back or that transfer back. So when we set up an estate plan, there are these different vehicles that we use for estate tax savings, gift planning, and so forth, such that once those assets are out of the title of the individual that used to own them, those assets are no longer subject to a lawsuit creditor reaching those assets.
Oh, that's a pretty interesting thing to do. I guess that's innovative. So, is that all part of the estate plan that you put together for your clients? That's asset protection. That's another piece of it. And, how does that integrate into the estate plan, I guess is the question I want to ask.
Well, the estate plan would be the dog and the asset protection would be the tail of the dog. It's a process by which we integrate both estate planning, estate tax planning, and asset protection.
Yeah. So then, so what are some of the techniques that you use for that?
Sure.
How does that work?
Well, we do an asset by asset evaluation. So many people have significant equity in their personal residences. A state like New York, where you are, or in California, where I am, the homestead exemption, the amount that the state allows a debtor to keep if they wind up in a lawsuit or they have a judgment, is very modest. In California, it's only $600,000 max. I think in New York, it's around $400,000 or $500,000. But if you have a house with a couple of $1 million of equity and you get sued beyond the exemption amount, the creditors can take that. So we have a trust we call the HELP Trust. It's an acronym that stands for Home Equity and Lifestyle Protection Trust. And this is a trust the client would take their home, place it in the trust, rent it back from the trust at fair market value rent. Again, we're assuming this is done when there's no foreseeable, expected, pending, or current lawsuits or creditors. And then when you rent the house back from your trust, you're no longer an owner. The trust is. You're a tenant. And as a tenant, your creditors cannot reach the equity of your home. It's become a very popular planning tool for our clients, particularly out here in California, where real estate values have skyrocketed and we have a very modest homestead exemption.
I've seen a lot of that with and families where parents put their home in a trust and then the children are the trustee. Is that similar to what you're talking about, or is that a different situation?
By setting up this irrevocable trust and placing the assets in the trust and then renting from the trust owns the assets, not the individual who's the tenant now. And whether the kids are trustees or some corporate trustee, the fact is that we've separated the ownership from the use. Asset protection is about controlling your wealth, but not owning it.
So then when the owner of the house passes away, the assets stay in the trust. And, if the children are the heirs, it passes on to them. How does that all work?
That's correct. Now, the trust I'm talking about is an irrevocable trust. It's not like your revocable family trust that most people have. This is an irrevocable trust that's established in a state that recognizes asset protection trusts. Irrevocable trust. So you set up the trust, the kids and grandkids are the beneficiaries, you transfer the property to the trust, you claim your gift tax exemption, so there's no transfer tax, and then you enter into a lease where you rent the property from the trust, and the rental payments are used to pay the mortgage, the property taxes, and the improvements, and now the client is a tenant, not an owner. And then if somebody comes along and threatens a lawsuit, when you explain to the other side that the client doesn't own the property, they're simply tenants, it tends to discourage lawsuits from happening. Lawsuits are very expensive today. And the only way an individual is going to pursue you in a lawsuit is if they know they're going to recover something. And our job is about changing that dynamic.
So that's really helpful and interesting information. I want to take a little break now. Then when we come back, I want to talk to you about your book, Estate Planning for Women, because I think that's so important. And as a single woman myself and having a woman-owned firm, we have a lot of single women clients, whether they've been divorced or widowed. And I think there's so much helpful information in your book. I'd like to just talk about it a little bit. So we're going to take a little break now. We'll come back with Jeff Verdon.
Hey there. I just want to tell you a little bit about my new book that just came out called Mastering Your Financial Life Cycles. And here it is. It's how to successfully manage your money in every decade of life. I co-authored this with my CFO, Liz Levy. And together we created this manual that's going to help you through every stage of life. We talk about having a baby. We talk about young adulthood, pre-retirement, what to do when you're at that age of retirement. If you're contemplating divorce, do you need an estate plan? We cover all of these, each subject in a different chapter. And I really think that you're going to find this so helpful because at the end of every chapter, we have checklists that you can look at and you can use, and they can be a guide for you. So this is a wonderful manual that we've created. It's available on Amazon. You can also find it on our website at judithheft.com/book. And we're here for you. If you need anything, reach out. I hope you enjoy the book. Here's another picture of it, just so you know what's going on. Here it is. And I'm really proud of it. It's my second book. And I'd love to have you read it and give me your feedback. Judy Heft, judithheft.com, financial and lifestyle concierge, celebrating 26 years in business. And over the years, I've learned so much. And what I've been trying to do is impart a little bit of this knowledge to you so I can help all of you become as financially organized as I am.
And we're back here with Jeffrey Verdon. So Jeff, I think it's fascinating that you wrote a book on estate planning for women. Why did you decide to pick that topic? And then let's talk a little bit about the book.
Sure. I was a speaker on cruise ships at financial conferences and for the cruise lines dating back from 1990 to just before COVID. And when I would do these programs, I would have women come up to me, older women particularly, and they'd say, Jeff, would you ever do a workshop just for the women? And I would ask, well, why would you want me to do that? Well, when the men are in the room, we're not comfortable asking questions. We know we're going to live longer than most of our husbands. And a lot of our husbands are not taking care of the estate planning and financial planning that we need. And so we'd like you to do a program just for the women. And I thought, well, that's an excellent idea. So I did a program for the women. It was very popular. The men weren't there. They asked a lot of questions. I got a tremendous amount of intel and feedback from the challenges that women have, particularly when they're married to stubborn husbands. So after doing this for several years, I wrote the book. This is now in the 4th edition. And I did a workshop called Estate Planning for Women Only, No Men Allowed. And I would not let the men stay in the room. Well, some of the men didn't appreciate that, and they would take their wives out of the room. But for the most part, the women really enjoyed it. And then the women would bring their husbands to my main presentation on estate planning and asset protection. And so I find that when I present this information to the women and they're more informed, they're much more willing to engage in the planning. When we have a couple come into our office for a consultation, there's a copy of that book sitting in front of them. I specifically address questions to the woman because I want the woman to be engaged in the conversation. And then when we finish the documents and we send drafts out to the clients, we send a set to the husband, but we also send a set to the wives so they can read them. And I think they feel like they're just more engaged in the process when you address them specifically. So the book's been very popular. And as laws change and things develop, we update the book, and we just finished updating the book last year.
That's so great that you're focusing on the women too, because I know that a lot of women, like you said, they're intimidated. They're afraid to ask these questions. And if you're just with lawyers, a bunch of men in a room and you're the only woman, you can feel, and even if you're there with your partner, who might be a man, you do have a tendency to feel intimidated, because I know that a lot of times they're focusing on directing their questions and answers to the man and ignoring the woman. So I understand how those women were afraid. And I think that's so great that you're doing that, because it is different.
And admittedly, I didn't understand that until a couple of women came up to me and they sort of took me to school and made sure I understood how they felt. But when I thought about it, it was pretty logical, and it just seemed like the right thing to do. And it's been a very popular part of our law practice for many years.
That's great. It's so important to address everybody equally, as I would say. So, yeah. So what are some of the points that are just specifically that you want the women to know?
Well, we start from the very basic. Think about all the stuff you have and how you'd like that stuff to be handled when you're no longer with us. Think about how you'd like your legacy to pass. If you have a stubborn husband or partner who won't go see the estate planning lawyer, or perhaps they're not he's not talking to the kids because of something that may have happened, let's try to remedy that. And a lot of challenges I find, particularly in second and third and fourth marriages, where the husband, the new wife is not that much older than the kids. And then what's going to happen? One thing that you don't want to have happen is when the assets pass into the family trust when the husband dies, you don't want the kids controlling the distribution of those proceeds to the wife when the kids are are not that much younger than the spouse. So we talk about how can we leave assets to the kids, maybe a life insurance policy or carve out a portion of the assets so the kids get something when the husband dies, but then you leave the surviving spouse alone, and basically she's the trustee of her family trust, and she can hold her trustee meetings in the showers if she wants, because the kids are not going to interfere with that. The last thing you want the surviving spouse to feel is like that every time she spends $1 from the trust, she's taking it from the pockets of the children. It creates a very uncomfortable feeling and very stressful environment.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm sure it's pretty stressful. So how can they find your book?
Well, they can contact our office, so they can go on Amazon and type in estate planning for women only, and my book will pop up and they can purchase it. And I promise them they'll have a good read.
Oh, definitely. I agree with you. It was fascinating information. So thanks for doing that. And then how can our listeners find you?
Well, they can contact me at J Verdon, Verdon, letter J Verdon at FRB Law, J Verdon at FRB Law, or they can call the office 949-333-8152, 949-333-8152. And on my website, we have many of the strategies that I use in my planning reduced to video, so they can watch a 2.5 or 3 minute video that describes the asset protection trust, the high set trust that we do, the help trust I described earlier, and many of the other strategies that we use for our clients.
Oh, this was great. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I really enjoyed talking to you and, hearing your point of view. And I'm glad that you're focusing a little bit on some women, because we really need that. We need you men in our corner, so to speak. So thank you so much. Thanks for being
an honor to be here with. Thank you, Judy. Pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into Mastering Your Financial Life, hosted by Judy Heft. You can read chapters of her books and catch prior episodes of the show at www.judithheft.com. Thank you for your positive comments and sharing this show with others.